The golden light from the crystal chandeliers cascaded down, shimmering across the cold marble floor. The piano drifted slowly, like a delicate thread, pulling the atmosphere taut. In the most luxurious restaurant in Manhattan, every sound suddenly halted, forks and knives frozen mid-air, laughter strangled in throats. At the center of the room, a boy stood up. His small legs, bound in heavy steel braces, trembled so violently that it seemed they might collapse at any moment. Yet he tried. His face pale with nervousness, lips pressed tight. That boy, Daniel Caldwell, the only son of one of the wealthiest men in America, was doing something no one expected. He reached out. Reached toward a girl. She was not seated at the lavish tables, nor draped in silk or diamonds. She wore only a faded server's uniform, faint scratches still etched on her hands from endless long shifts. Her brown skin glowed beneath the lights, so striking that no one could ignore her. Her name was Maya Carter, 28 years old. The only black waitress in that room was drowning in privilege. She had never wished to be the center of attention, especially in a place where every glance was ready to twist the most minor mistake into a reason for humiliation. Yet that trembling hand, the small hand of a child desperate to be led, made her stop. And in that fleeting moment, the entire room held its breath. A voice tore the silence apart. "Control your son, sir. This is not a dance hall, and she's just the help." The restaurant manager, his tailored suit pulled tight, face flushed with outrage. Snickers rose from a few tables, quiet but sharp enough to wound. Just the help. One phrase carrying the weight of generations of prejudice. Ethan Caldwell, the man they called the uncrowned king of Wall Street, sat motionless. He gripped his crystal glass, trying to mask his tension. For the first time in 2 years since the accident, he had brought his son out in public. And his greatest fear had come true: pitying stares, whispers, degradation. He leaned forward, his voice low and cold as steel. "Daniel, sit down, now." But the boy did not pull back his hand. That frail arm still stretched outward, hovering in the air, trembling yet resolute. Maya looked around, eyes cold and white as blades. Contempt is evident in every furrowed brow, every curling smirk. She understood, one step, and she would lose her job. One grasp of that hand, and her life could veer into unforeseeable paths. But Daniel's eyes, those eyes begged for something simple he had been denied for so long: to be guided. Maya drew a long breath. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it upon the icy silver tray. That small act thundered through the hushed hall. Then she bent down and clasped the boy's small hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Her voice was gentle, yet it rang clear as silver chimes. No one had time to react. The entire hall held its breath, forks slid against plates, their faint clatter cutting into the air like a blade. Phones rose, recording what everyone believed would end in disgrace. But Maya did not tremble. And neither did Daniel. Amid the cold brilliance of crystal and the suffocating weight of disdain, a wealthy white man, a disabled boy, and a humble black waitress now stood on the threshold of a story no one in that room could have foreseen. And in that very moment, a tiny crack began to form in the wall of arrogance that surrounded the world of the elite. No one in that room truly knew who Daniel Caldwell was. To them, he was only the frail son of billionaire Ethan Caldwell, a name wrapped in money and tabloid noise. But behind the little tailored suit and the cold steel braces was a childhood already broken. 2 years earlier, a car accident had stolen the woman Daniel loved most, his mother. That tragedy not only left a void in the Caldwell household, but it also robbed an 8-year-old boy of the ability to run and play. From then on, the vast mansion became a prison. Long, silent corridors, gleaming rooms that felt cold as ice, all of it wrapped Daniel in a fog of loneliness. His father, Ethan Caldwell, was a name feared across Wall Street. They said he could buy a company with a nod or topple a market with a single phrase. But that power could not touch his son's heart. Ethan chose the most straightforward way. He hid Daniel from the world's gaze, shielding him from pity, from whispers, from shame. And so, for 2 years, Daniel had not stepped into a restaurant, a theater, or a playground. Tonight's dinner in a glittering Manhattan restaurant was the first time Ethan had brought his son out. A test run, and deep down he prayed nothing unusual would happen. But the unusual had already arrived. And Maya Carter, the girl whose hand Daniel had reached for, carried a past steeped in shadows as well. Once, Maya had been an outstanding student of special education at New York University. Professors called her a spark in the dark for her passion and her gift of seeing potential in children the world labeled as defective. But in her second year, when her mother fell gravely ill, Maya was forced to drop out, working while caring for her family. She applied for scholarships, pleaded for aid, but one interview shut the door forever. The scholarship director, a grey-haired white man, looked her straight in the eye and said words she would never forget. "We need someone who can finish the program, not someone who will waste resources. People like you rarely make it. People like you." Those words cut deep into Maya. Not just because she was poor, but because her skin had been marked as a minus in the eyes of the powerful. From then on, Maya worked 3 jobs at once, cleaning by day, serving tables at night, and selling second-hand books on weekends. And when the city finally slept, she sat writing notes, sketching unfinished lesson plans on how children with disabilities could learn to guide themselves. No one knew, no one cared. To the customers in this fine restaurant, she was only the help, a nameless shadow in a faded uniform. And Ethan Caldwell, the man seated in that luxurious leather chair, had never looked at her either. To him, servers like Maya existed to pour wine, clear plates, and bow low. Names like hers did not need to be remembered. Until the moment Daniel's hand reached toward hers. The air in the restaurant tightened like a drawn string, every gaze locked on the Caldwell table. Some aristocratic women smirked, hiding their mouths behind satin fans as though witnessing a farce. Some gentlemen frowned, shaking their heads. Outrageous, a boy like him, and with her? Whispers threaded through the room like needles piercing skin. In that instant, Maya understood more clearly than ever. If she refused Daniel's hand, the boy would learn yet another lesson of rejection, that no one wanted to dance with a child like him. But if she took it, she would touch the very edge of what this place could bear, and the weight of contempt would fall squarely upon her. Daniel's eyes quivered, shimmering beneath the chandelier. In them was a plea, a spark of courage, and a fragile trust placed in the only person who did not belong in this world. A fragile trust, yet true. Maya inhaled deeply, catching the mingled scents of expensive wine, lavish perfume, and the metallic tang of the boy's steel braces. For a moment, she thought of her mother, her unfinished studies, that phrase soaked in prejudice. And she knew this was no longer a dance, it was a choice. That glittering hall, with all its chandeliers and scornful whispers, was about to witness something it had never been built to face: the dignity of a black woman and the yearning to be led by a boy imprisoned in steel. The air in the room thickened. Glasses of red wine still gleamed beneath the chandeliers, but no one cared to drink. Every eye, every breath, fixed upon the single moment, Maya's hand clasped in Daniel's. A whisper broke out from a corner. "She'll be gone tomorrow." Another scoffed. "Imagine a black waitress entertaining a Caldwell." The words fell like blades, mingling with the rustle of silk and the contemptuous clearing of throats. They did not need to be shouted, only sharp enough to cut into flesh. The restaurant manager, Mr. Thornton, stepped forward, face burning red. "Miss Carter, put down that tray. Return to your duties now." Maya lifted her gaze. Her eyes showed no rebellion, no submission. They shone with a quiet steadiness, as though long accustomed to living under scornful stares. But this time, she did not look away. She removed her apron and placed it neatly on the silver tray. Her voice rang out, low and resolute. "I can't dance in an apron." The room shuddered. The words were not loud, not harsh, but loud enough for all to hear. Amid gowns and tuxedos, they cut through the facade like a blade. Ethan Caldwell leaned slightly forward, icy eyes sweeping over his son and the woman before him. His teeth clenched. "Maya Carter, do you understand what you're doing?" Maya did not answer. Instead, she bent lower, gripping Daniel's hand as though to pass him the strength she had guarded all these years. Daniel swallowed hard, his trembling legs fought to lift from the floor. The sound rang out, the scrape of metal against marble. Cold, piercing. Each step tore through the silence, leaving gashes in the hearts of all who watched. Maya moved slowly, steadily, neither guiding nor dragging. She let the boy lead, her whole body leaned into each hesitant shift. What others saw as clumsy, she felt was actual music. Whispers rippled. A middle-aged woman clicked her tongue. "Ridiculous! What kind of lesson is that?" A man muttered under his breath. "It's a disgrace. Caldwell should be ashamed." But amid the cruel murmurs, Daniel smiled. A smile flashed, fragile yet unmistakable, like sunlight piercing through a dusty window. For the first time in 2 years, his lips curved in joy unforced. Ethan's hand tightened around his glass. The music in his mind suddenly burst into memory. His wife, blonde hair cascading softly, was holding Daniel in the living room, playing piano as they danced. She laughed and said, "It's not about perfection. It's about connection." Ethan blinked, but the image did not fade. Before him now was not a black waitress overstepping her place, but a woman who truly saw his son in a way even he had forgotten. Daniel managed 3 steps, only 3, but for him it was the world. As the music ended, Maya bowed to the boy, her voice solemn. "Thank you for the honor." Another wave of silence swept the room. No one dared laugh, no one dared applaud. Only Ethan's gaze remained, sharp as knives but trembling deep within. He rose abruptly, his voice hoarse. "Your name?" Maya replied calmly. "Maya Carter, sir." From his vest pocket, he pulled a business card and slammed it onto the table. "My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. The entire room held its breath. They knew this was not an invitation, it was a sentence. That night, when the crystal chandeliers had faded behind him, Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his oak-paneled office, high on the 30th floor. The city outside blazed with light, pulsing like a vein that never ceased to flow. But inside, the room was dark, lit only by the swirl of wine in his glass, and the echoes still lingering in his mind. The scrape of metal against marble. The whispers of contempt. And Daniel's smile. 2 years had passed since the accident, and Ethan had not seen his son smile like that. Not the forced grin when a nurse told a joke. Not the weary curve of lips when a doctor said, "Progress is good," but a genuine smile, a living smile, a free smile, bursting from the child's soul itself. And what he could not deny was that it appeared only when his son stood beside a woman he had never noticed before, a black waitress. On his desk, between contracts worth billions, sat a silver-framed photo. In it, a woman with a gentle smile cradled Daniel in her arms. Elizabeth, his late wife. Memory rushed back like a cold wave. The night before the accident, Elizabeth had danced with Daniel in the living room. The piano tune was slow, clumsy, but warm. Daniel stood with his little feet resting on his mother's shoes, stumbling through each beat. Ethan remembered standing there, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "He'll fall, don't let him lead." Elizabeth only shook her head, her eyes tender yet firm. "It's not about perfection, Ethan. It's about connection." That was the last sentence he remembered clearly, before the red flash of police lights swallowed the night. Now, in the stillness of evening, that memory blended with the image of Maya Carter holding Daniel's hand and not guiding and not correcting, only the patient, following each halting step. A black waitress had done what doctors, therapists, and specialists could not. She had drawn out his son's smile again. Inside Ethan, a storm brewed. Part of him wanted to deny it, to believe it was a coincidence, that Daniel smiled because of the music, not because of the woman's presence. But the truth stood bare. The boy had not looked around, Daniel's eyes fixed only on Maya's, eyes steady, warm, as though they saw not a disabled child but a whole human being. Ethan took a sip of wine, trying to chase away the haunting, but the more he drank, the sharper the image became. Every sneer in the restaurant, Every contemptuous glance stabbed deeper, not only because they looked down on Maya, but because they looked down on his son. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell felt the coldness of power. It protected no one. It warmed no one. It was only a high wall, imprisoning him and the child he had sworn to protect. Elsewhere in the city, Maya Carter sat in her small Bronx apartment. The old ceiling leaked, but it was warmer than any of Ethan's offices. On her desk lay notebooks crowded with handwriting, notes about children with disabilities, sketches of exercises, scraps of paper scribbled with the words, "Let them lead." Maya traced her fingers over the words. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. Perhaps a cold dismissal, perhaps public humiliation, but she knew one thing. For tonight, at least, a boy had smiled. And for Maya, that was enough to keep the fire alive for one more day. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, hand trembling as he set down the glass. Deep inside, he heard his wife's whisper, drifting back from memory. "Ethan, don't try to control every step, just be there, and let him lead." He opened his eyes, gaze falling to the gleaming card on his desk. The name was printed clearly, Maya Carter. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. And he knew this would not merely be a meeting. It would be the first turn on a road he had never prepared to walk. The next morning, Manhattan still surged like a river of steel and glass. But in Maya Carter's footsteps, each beat felt heavy. Her worn shoes echoed hollowly across the grand lobby of Caldwell Tower, a skyscraper, a symbol of financial power, where cold numbers dictated the fate of thousands. The polished marble floor reflected her image. A black woman in a white blouse bought at a discount market, a simple blue skirt and a handbag frayed at the straps. Amid Armani suits, silk ties and Hermes purses, she looked like a discordant note in the symphony of wealth. Eyes followed her from the reception desk. A blonde woman, her face taut with the confidence of the elite, looked Maya up and down, then lifted the phone. "Miss Carter to see Mr. Caldwell." The reply was curt. "18th floor. Miss Winters will escort you." The elevator swallowed Maya slowly. As the doors slid shut, she caught her reflection in the steel mirror. A small figure, yet eyes burning bright. 18th floor. Miss Winters, Ethan's private secretary, appeared with decisive steps. A tall woman in her 40s, her cold face framed by thin-rimmed glasses. Her gaze lingered on Maya, slicing like a blade. "So, you're the waitress." Maya only nodded, silent. They walked down a mirrored hallway where suited employees glanced up, curious. Whispers slipped out. "What's she doing here? Is she lost?" Miss Winters tilted her head, her voice quiet but sharp. "He had you fired, didn't he? It happens. Powerful clients call, and people like you lose your jobs." Maya turned, her smile faint, not from amusement, but from weary familiarity. "People like me? And where exactly is our place, Miss Winters?" For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. One icy, one steady, then Winters' phone rang. "He'll see you now." The office door swung open. The room was nearly the size of an apartment, walls of glass rising from floor to ceiling, offering a sweeping view of Manhattan. Ethan Caldwell stood with his back turned, gazing down at the city as though it belonged to him. "Mr. Caldwell," Maya said evenly. He turned. The same face, proud, closed, eyes a glacial grey-blue, but compared to the night before, something different lingered there, a crack he himself did not wish to admit. He gestured for her to sit. Then silence. Silence as strategy, the kind CEOs use to make opponents reveal themselves. Maya did not speak. She sat upright, hands folded in her lap. At last, Ethan broke the stillness. "Do you have a background?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Education, college." Her gaze held steady. "Bachelor's in Child Development from NYU. Incomplete Master's in Special Education." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly concealed. "And yet you work as a waitress," Maya replied, unblinking. "I work 3 jobs, the restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can. Bills don't pay themselves, Mr. Caldwell." The silence thickened again. Ethan tapped his fingers lightly against the oak desk. Then he drew out a folder. Inside was a photograph of an old community center. The sign read, "Freedom Steps." He placed it on the desk, meeting Maya's eyes. "You founded this 6 years ago, a dance program for children with physical disabilities." Maya's hands tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I co-founded it with my sister, yes." Ethan nodded slowly, then delivered words that froze the air. "And now, it's about to close. No funding, no sponsors. Am I right?" Maya stayed silent. He was right. What he did not know was that his own foundation had rejected their proposal 3 times without ever reading it correctly. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low, controlled. "I want you to work for me." Maya looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. His tone sharpened. "Not as a waitress, as a therapeutic companion for Daniel. I'll pay you 5 times what you make now." The room sank into silence. The city outside roared on, but here only the grandfather clock marked time in slow beats. Maya drew a deep breath, then she rose to her feet. "No." Ethan froze, disbelief flashing in his eyes. No one had ever refused Ethan Caldwell. Maya met his gaze, her voice calm but resonant as a bronze bell. "I don't work for men who see my skin before my competence, and your son doesn't need someone paid to care. He needs space. To lead, id." The words fell heavy. And in that moment, all the power, wealth, and authority in Ethan's hands could not conceal the truth. The air inside Caldwell Tower's office was heavy as lead. Maya's single word, "no," still echoed, as though it had not only rejected a job offer, but denied the very power Ethan had long wielded to bend the world. Ethan stood frozen, his face flushed faintly with suppressed anger. Yet in his eyes, a flicker of confusion appeared, something even he himself did not recognize. Never before had a black woman, a mere waitress, dared to stand in his office, encased in towering glass walls, and look him directly in the eye without bowing. Maya gently placed a small card on the oak desk. "My Freedom Steps, Community Center, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Daniel, the first class is free." She turned and walked away. Her simple shoes struck softly yet firmly against the stone floor. The door closed behind her, leaving Ethan alone, facing the small card lying in the vast expanse of his office. In the hallway, Miss Winters was waiting. Her eyes were sharp, incredulous. "You just turned down an offer from Mr. Caldwell. Are you crazy?" Maya smiled faintly, but there was no bitterness in it, only a serenity difficult to name. "Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than be property." Those words, by chance, slipped through the door, not yet fully shut, and fell into Ethan's ear. He flinched. That afternoon, Daniel sat by the wide window of the Caldwell mansion. His legs bound tight in braces, his gaze rested quietly on the still garden. "Dad," he whispered when Ethan entered. Why did she say no? The innocent question pierced like an arrow. Ethan did not answer immediately. He sat down, striving for composure in his voice. "She doesn't understand the opportunity she's refusing." Daniel shook his head, his clear eyes steady. "She understood me." Those 4 words struck Ethan mute. He turned his face away, but inside the truth gnawed at him, inescapable. That night, Ethan sat in his study. Maya's small card still lay there, square upon the oak desk, stark against contracts worth billions. He was used to thick agreements, binding clauses, but this card held no conditions, no coercion. It was simply an invitation, plain, ordinary, and it kept him awake. He picked it up, his finger tracing the uneven scrawl. "Freedom Steps." In his mind, the scrape of metal against marble echoed once more. Alongside it, Daniel's smile. Ethan leaned back, eyes shut. In the darkness, he saw his wife, Elizabeth, dancing with Daniel in the living room, the boy's small feet resting atop hers. She looked at him, smiling, her voice alive in memory. "Ethan, don't try to control every step. Follow." He opened his eyes with a sigh. The card was still there. Too small a thing for a man like him to notice, and yet too real to ignore. The next day, in the board meeting, Ethan wore his usual mask of cold composure. While directors argued about markets and profits, His mind drifted to a shabby room in the Bronx where children with frail legs danced in their own way. He said nothing, but beneath the oak table, his hand clutched tightly at the small card inside his vest pocket. In the Bronx, Maya continued her class at Freedom Steps. The room was old with peeling paint, but the laughter of children made it shine. She did not know that, far away in a tower above the city, a man wrestled with himself because of the little card she had left behind. Nor did she know that her silence, her pride, had sewn a crack into a wall of arrogance thought to be unshakable. A week later, the practice room at Freedom Steps pulsed with music. Not the classical piano of a luxury restaurant, but a lively rhythm spilling from an old speaker. The plaster walls were peeling, the wooden floor scratched, and sunlight streamed through cracked window panes. Yet within that room, laughter rang, pure, bright, unrestrained, as though no shadow could exist. Maya Carter stood in the middle of the children. Some leaned on crutches, some with walkers, some in wheelchairs. All spun, stumbled, and moved in their own way. There was only one rule: your rhythm, your rules. She clapped to the beat, guiding but never imposing. Each child found their own path, and in Maya's gentle gaze, the children felt safe. Outside the window, a sleek black Bentley idled quietly. The driver watched through the rearview mirror, waiting, but the back seat remained still. Inside the car, Ethan Caldwell sat unmoving. A simple grey sweater replaced his expensive suits, yet his presence was as heavy as ever. His hands pressed firmly against the steering wheel, veins taut. Veins. Daniel sat beside him, a small hand resting on the door, eyes fixed on the sounds drifting from the room. "Dad, can we go in?" His voice trembled, quivering with both fear and anticipation. Ethan stayed silent, years of pride condensed into a single battle, the act of stepping out of this luxury car. He had never set foot in such a place, an old community center in the Bronx, a world apart from his silken realm. He drew a long breath. Then, surprising even himself, Ethan opened the car door. The Bentley's heavy door slammed shut with a dull clack, so stark against the music and laughter within. Daniel let out a soft cheer, his eyes lighting up. Slowly, he climbed out, adjusting his braces. Each step was still halting, but brimming with determination. Ethan followed, and in that instant, heads turned inside the practice room. A billionaire had stepped into a place he had never belonged. The air froze for a beat. Maya approached smiling. She did not bow, did not shrink, only calm, steady. "Welcome, Mr. Caldwell." Daniel looked around, awestruck. Other children danced, spun, fell, and rose again. A girl in a wheelchair twirled like a spinning fan. A boy with a prosthetic leg tried to pose like a ballet dancer. The whole room was chaos, and achingly beautiful. "It looks chaotic," Ethan muttered, frowning, trying to hide his unease. "There is structure," Maya answered gently, "just not the one you're used to." She turned to Daniel. "Would you like to join?" Daniel glanced at his father, waiting. Ethan clenched his jaw, then nodded. "Go on, I'll be right here." The boy drew a breath, then stepped into the circle. Maya stepped back, letting him merge with the others. Beside Ethan, an older woman with a cane approached. Her grey hair neatly braided, her eyes alight, her slow gait filled with quiet authority. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "you probably don't remember me. Dr. Elaine Mercer, neuroscientist, Harvard." Ethan stiffened. He remembered. This woman had once sent 3 research proposals to the Caldwell Foundation. He had rejected all 3, without explanation. "What are you doing here?" he asked, suspicion in his tone. Dr. Mercer smiled. "I oversee the research program here. We're studying how non-directive approaches to movement affect neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges." Ethan was taken aback. "Research? This is just a dance class." "No, Mr. Caldwell." Maya's voice rose from behind him, steady and firm. "It's a rehabilitation program, a pilot study. Freedom Steps isn't just a name, it's a methodology." He looked around the shabby room, the laughing children, and suddenly felt his world tremble. Why do you work as a waitress then, if this is what you lead?" Maya's gaze held his, unwavering. "Because men like you rejected our proposal 3 times." A silence descended. Ethan felt as if he had been struck back. Every word she spoke, calm yet sharp, cut deep into his pride. And in that moment, Ethan Caldwell realized the woman he had dismissed as the help was in truth the co-founder of a program that could change his son's life forever. He wanted to deny it, to turn away, but Daniel's eyes from the center of the circle held him still. The boy smiled, a smile no different from that night beneath the chandeliers. And Ethan's wall of pride cracked a little further. The music in the practice room had just faded when the rickety wooden door suddenly burst open. A swarm of reporters rushed in, cameras raised, microphones thrust forward, flashbulbs flared, blinding, striking across Ethan Caldwell's face. He froze. He was accustomed to lavish press conferences where every question was rehearsed, every image carefully curated. But here, in the Bronx, there was no preparation, no script, only sharp questions fired from every angle. "Mr. Caldwell, is it true your foundation rejected Freedom Steps' proposal 3 times? How do you explain your presence here today after ignoring their work for years? Do you admit discrimination played a role in those rejections?" The crackle of cameras filled the room, pens scratched across notepads like rainfall. Ethan stiffened. For a moment, he nearly raised his hand to silence it all. But when he turned his head, Daniel's eyes caught his. And in those eyes, there was no fear, only waiting. Maya stepped forward, her voice calm amid the chaos. "Let them ask, Mr. Caldwell. They deserve the truth." Her words hushed the room for a heartbeat. Ethan swallowed hard. Beads of sweat gathered at his temple, a rare thing for a man who once negotiated with governments. "You used my son," he murmured, trying for composure, but unable to steady the tremor in his tone. Maya turned, her gaze unwavering. "No, Daniel chose to dance. I only chose to follow." A ripple of murmurs ran through the reporters. One shouted, "Mr. Caldwell, will you finally support this program or continue to ignore it?" Just then, a strange sound cut through. The entire room turned. Daniel stood at the center of the circle, his small hands trembling as he unfastened one of his steel braces. "Daniel!" Ethan cried out, stepping forward. But Maya extended her hand, stopping him gently, her voice soft. "Wait, watch." The room held its breath. Daniel summoned all his strength, his face flushed, sweat beading at his brow. His frail legs fought for balance. And then, one step. Slow, shaking, but whole. Applause erupted, cheers filled the shabby room, flashbulbs burst like fireworks, capturing the moment a boy, after 2 years imprisoned by fear, took a step on his own. Ethan stood motionless, stunned. In his heart, the wall of pride shattered. He no longer saw his son as a problem to be solved, no longer as a burden to be hidden. Daniel was a child, a human being, a leader. He turned to Maya, his voice hoarse. How did you do this?" Maya looked at him, her gaze tender yet firm. "I didn't. He did. All I gave him was the space to try." In the glare of cameras, Ethan realized he had no escape. He could deny, he could walk away, but then the world would see him as a man cold enough to dismiss his own son's smile. Or he could bow his head and learn to follow. Every face in the room, every reporter, every child with crutches, wheelchairs, prosthetic legs, all watched him. This was no longer a private encounter. This was a public reckoning. And Ethan Caldwell, the man who commanded financial markets with a word, was, for the first time in his life, forced to answer a question money could not buy his way out of. Would he have the courage to admit he had been wrong? The applause still thundered in the shabby room. Daniel stood at the center of the circle, breath quick and shallow, sweat beading his brow, yet his eyes shone brilliantly. One step, just one step, but it had shattered the invisible wall that had imprisoned him for 2 years. Reporters jostled, microphones thrust toward Ethan Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell, your son just took his first independent step here at Freedom Steps. Do you have a comment? Is it true your foundation rejected this program multiple times?" Will you take responsibility for denying funding that could have helped countless children? Flashbulbs flared relentlessly. Ethan stood rigid, the sensation of being cornered pressing in. He had once sat in boardrooms where billions shifted with the tilt of his head. Yet never once had he felt so small. He looked at his son. Daniel paid no heed to the crowd, no heed to the microphones or the lights. He smiled, his clear eyes gleaming. And in that moment, Ethan saw with piercing clarity, this was no longer a child to be hidden. This was a leader, one who had shown him a path he himself had never dared tread. Ethan drew a long breath, then turned to the reporters. His voice rose, hoarse but clear. "Do you know what's hardest for people in my position?" The room hushed. All eyes were fixed on him. He swallowed, then continued, each word falling heavy as stone. "It's admitting when we're wrong." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Cameras clicked faster. One reporter shouted, "So are you saying you were wrong, Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, I was wrong. We were wrong. My foundation turned away from this program 3 times, and in doing so, we turned away from children who deserved better." Maya stood nearby, silent, but her hands tightened slightly, her heart pounding. She had not expected Ethan to speak those words, not here, not before the entire world. Ethan continued, his voice steadier now, lower, almost sincere. "That ends today. The Caldwell Foundation will fund Freedom Steps in full for 5 years. And we will build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology pioneered by Mercer and Ms. Carter." The flashes blazed fiercely. The room erupted in cheers, furious note-taking, and phones ringing in a frenzy. He raised his hand, calling for calm. Then, turning to Maya, he added one condition. On one condition, Ms. Carter retains full autonomy, no corporate interference. This program will remain hers. Another silence spread, but this time not the silence of contempt as in that grand restaurant on the glittering night. This was the silence of respect, the kind no one had ever imagined could be granted to a black waitress. Daniel staggered forward, leaning lightly on Maya, then lifted his gaze to his father. "Dad, you followed?" Ethan bowed his head slightly. "Yes, son, I followed." His eyes brimmed red, and for the first time he did not hide it. The reporters streamed out, news spreading like wildfire. But for those who remained in that old room, another change had occurred, quieter, deeper. A wall had fallen, a bridge had been built. And it had all begun, with a single hand clasped beneath the cold chandeliers of a luxury restaurant. 3 months after that tearful afternoon in the Bronx, a vacant lot by the Hudson River burst into new life. The sounds of bulldozers, drills, and hurried workers rose like an unusual symphony. Yet even amid steel beams and clouds of cement dust, one thing stood out. A great sign at the site's entrance, bold letters gleaming. Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. A vision by Maya Carter and Dr. Elaine Mercer. Ethan Caldwell stood back, observing. He no longer pressed into technical meetings, no longer demanded control over every detail. He had learned to listen and learned to stand behind, not before. And at every meeting, Daniel was present, no longer timid, no longer hiding. The 10-year-old boy, now needing only a light cane, joined the other children in suggesting designs for the center. Ramps wide enough for wheelchairs, mirrors hung low so every child could see themselves, rooms filled with warm light instead of the cold glare of hospitals. Maya oversaw the process, not as an invisible waitress anymore, but as program director. She no longer wore a faded uniform, but a simple blouse with the Freedom Steps logo. To the children, she was more than a teacher. She was proof that worth was never defined by skin color or title. Opening day. The main hall glowed, spacious, bright, welcoming. No peeling paint, no creaking floors. Dozens of children and parents gathered, smiles wide. On the small stage, Daniel and 3 other children led a short dance. Their steps were still unsteady, but each beat radiated confidence unseen before. Ethan stood at the back of the crowd. For the first time, he did not push to the front, did not need a microphone, did not need the cameras fixed on him. He stood there, hand tightening as he fought back tears. Maya stepped up beside him. She spoke softly, like a gentle reminder. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore." Ethan nodded, his voice trembling. "No, but he still needs me to walk beside him." They stood in silence. But in that silence, a bond had been forged between a once proud father and a once dismissed woman. When reporters approached again, microphones extended, they asked Ethan, "Mr. Caldwell, what has been the biggest lesson of this journey?" He looked at Daniel, now helping a small girl find her balance on the stage. Then he turned back to the cameras, his voice dropping low, steady. "And the true leaders are not the ones who command every step, but the ones who have the humility to follow when someone shows them a better way." The cameras flashed endlessly, but to Ethan, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the smile on his son's face, the smile he thought had been lost forever. And so, from a quiet evening beneath cold chandeliers, from a trembling hand extended, a small revolution had begun. It had not sprung from billion-dollar contracts, but from the courage of a black woman who dared to say no. And it ended with one of the most powerful men on Wall Street learning to say, "I was wrong."